Welcome to Perspectives El Paso. I'm Leon Blevins of EPCC TV. I've been doing this show since 2007. When I first started doing the program, it was in the spring of 2007. In the fall, as Christmas was coming up, I sent out a Christmas letter to my friends and relatives, and I mentioned it. I was now doing a television show, a weekly show. A cousin, I believe it was a cousin from California, called me and said, "Oh, hey, you mentioned a TV show. Tell me about your TV show. What is it? What is it like?" I said, "Well, it's like one with Forrest Gump. You're sitting on a park bench, and I sit down beside you, and you look over at me, and I say, 'Hi there, I'm Forrest Gump.' And I say, 'What's your name?' And you tell me your name. And then, 'What kind of work do you do? Are you married? Do you have any children? What are your hobbies?' All those kind of things. Just a general conversation. That's the nature of my program. So all of these years, I've been pretending that I'm Forrest Gump, but I'm really Leon Blevins. At that time, I was professor of government in the government department at our college. Today, I'm playing Forrest Gump, and I have a guest that I just met yesterday evening at a small gathering at former Mayor John Cook's home. And this guest that I have with me today is from Oklahoma. He's an Okie. Welcome.
It's great to be here, John. Thank you so much, Leon. I appreciate it.
Glad to have you here today. And then we had breakfast together this morning, and you spoke at our breakfast. This is National Day of Prayer, so proclaimed many years by President of the United States, and it's still going on. And so that's what we did. We met this morning, and we had an opening prayer. It wasn't too long. Then we had our meal. And then we had a closing prayer. It's the longest closing prayer, benediction, that I've ever been to or heard, because we did not just have one preacher.
No.
We had about 10, and I brought the list: Baptist, Baha'i Faith, Buddhist, Catholic, Jewish, Lutheran, Methodist, Muslim, Native American, and Presbyterian, at least that many.
That's right.
And what was great about that meeting was that it was open to many people of different faiths, and we were there in a loving and friendship basis. It was not anger and arguing with each other about what we believe and what we practice.
Right.
And that's what you're interested in. And so tell me a little bit about where you were when you got into this kind of business. Yeah. And what do you do today? What's your job?
Well, Professor Blevins, let me first say what a delight it is to be with you today. I arrived in El Paso yesterday afternoon and have enjoyed this city tremendously over the last 24 hours or so.
You find us friendly, don't you?
Absolutely, absolutely, very friendly.
Oh, good.
And back in my hometown of Norman, Oklahoma, where I reside, I am the pastor at North Haven Church, which is a cooperative Baptist church located in Norman. And we have been in existence for 13 years now, and been ministering to that community as well as ministering to the global community for that time period.
Okay.
So that's what I do, but more importantly, I am the husband to my wife, Melissa, and the father to my two boys, Cole and Tanner.
That's a big responsibility.
That's a great responsibility.
Okay, now you got into working with this Baptist Joint Committee, and you travel around and you inspire other people to fight for separation of church and state and all kinds of religious freedoms. Tell us about that.
Yes. For many years now, I have been serving on the board of directors for the Baptist Joint Committee out of Washington, D.C. The Baptist Joint Committee has a 75-year history of working on Capitol Hill, talking with legislators, the executive branch, as well as the Supreme Court when it comes to church-state issues. I found my interest in the BJC many years ago, growing up as a Baptist and then continuing my education. I actually did my doctoral thesis on religious liberty and church-state separation.
Okay.
And so I have been a champion of religious liberty and church-state separation for many years now. It's a great organization, and I'm delighted to be a part of it, and was invited here this week by Join Us for Justice, which is the local chapter of Americans United here in El Paso, which is part of a national group out of D.C. that champions church-state separation. And so this morning I was delighted to spend time with not only ministers from many different faiths in the El Paso community, but lay members from those representing those faiths. And we had a wonderful time of celebrating diversity and celebrating and practicing our religious liberty.
Wow. Well, I went to Wayland Baptist College.
Right.
First, I went to a big school, Texas Tech in Lubbock, Texas,
Sure.
and then it was just too big for me, and I just didn't care for it. So I worked in all fields a year and a half. Then I went back to Wayland Baptist College. It was small and had a spiritual emphasis. We had to go to chapel every week, at least once a week. And that helped me tremendously. I ended up meeting Shanna Farr, she now is my wife, Shanna Blevins, at that location. And I got interested as a history major in civil rights and civil liberties, and particularly religion. So I wrote my master's thesis later at UTEP on slavery and Bible, the religion and Bible, and the U.S. Congress. So we have something in common here in our studies. And I went to Southwestern Seminary and studied church history there.
Right.
Fascinating. Tell us a little bit about what you think are some of the most important Supreme Court decisions with regard to religious liberty that your organization talks about.
Right. Well, there's certainly many cases that have been heard over the last several years, but probably looking back in decades, probably in 1947, the Everson case versus the Board of Education was an extremely important decision that was where an important opinion was delivered by Justice Hugo Black. And the opinion that Justice Black wrote about was maintaining, as his definition, a high and impregnable wall of separation between church and state. And when Justice Black picked up on that particular phrase, he was reaching back into our history, all the way back to our founding fathers, when Thomas Jefferson wrote that letter to Danbury Baptists in Connecticut, who were suffering religious oppression even after the Constitution had been ratified. And in his heartfelt letter to those Danbury Baptists, he used the term that there should forever be a wall of separation between church and state. So in the Everson case, when Justice Black picks up on Jefferson's metaphor, it becomes a bedrock principle for us in America, that those two incredible institutions that we revere, the church and the state, exist and have distinct objectives. Sometimes they overlap, but they're such distinct objectives for both of them that there needs to be an institutional separation between the two. Jefferson understood that, Justice Black understood that, and I think most Americans today understand the importance of keeping those separate. History has taught us anything, it has taught us when the wall of separation is chipped away at and at times even disregarded, then one of two things will happen. The church will suffer or the state will suffer, because one will always become a pawn of the other. And so maintaining that separation is vitally important to a healthy democracy, as well as a healthy church.
Well, people look at that term religious liberty from different viewpoints.
Right.
From your viewpoint, what do you think are the greatest challenges today, early 2017, to religious liberty in the United States?
I think what we're seeing today is a plurality of religions in our culture. There has been some attempts across the state to try to redefine religious liberty and what it particularly means. Religious liberty is freedom for religion, freedom of religion, and freedom from religion, as it is defined by Dr. Walter Sheridan at Mercer University. Religious liberty means that no one has the right to tell me how to worship or not to worship the God that I call my Creator. And so there's some redefining of religious liberty from people who want to use religious liberty as a club to discriminate in the public square. Religious liberty is not a license to discriminate against those who are citizens of this country. Religious liberty is the right for everyone to worship or not to worship their God as their conscience dictates.
Well, in the news a lot lately are issues like abortion, birth control, school vouchers, tax exemptions for religious institutions, and things of that nature. What, on that scale of those issues, what is your organization looking at as what you're having to deal with right now, maybe in court?
Yeah. Well, there's a Supreme Court case that was heard this last week. Trinity, it's called the Trinity case, and it's about Trinity Lutheran Church in Missouri that filed a suit against the state because the state had a program to help organizations be more ecologically friendly to the environment, and they had tires that they would ground up, and so organizations could file for a grant, receive a grant, and then receive those tires to put in their playground. Well, Trinity Lutheran Church wanted to apply for that grant but were rejected by the state on the basis of church-state separation. And so the question before the court is that an establishment of religion? Is that an advancement of religion by the state when tax dollars that are being used by the state, resources that are being used by the state, helping support even though it seems very benign, helping a church provide a rubber surface for their playground area.
Which means if the public tax dollars go for that, that church doesn't have to spend for that, they can spend it on their religious issues.
Exactly. That's exactly the issue at stake. You know, our organization is thrilled to death that Trinity Lutheran is wanting to be more ecologically friendly, and that is a wonderful thing, and we applaud their right to do so and to seek different ways or meaningful ways to provide that kind of space for their children. What we oppose is that government money would be used to do so, and that is the opposition in that case. We feel as an organization that that state dollars should be held for state and civic projects, but not religious projects. Again, we're not anti-religious. In fact, we're thrilled to death that Trinity Lutheran is wanting to do that, but they need to raise their own money to do so, because like you just suggested, if they were to receive that grant, then that frees money up for them to provide for their worship experience, for their mission projects, and that technically is an advancement of religion.
It'll be interesting to see what the result is on that.
Yeah, it will be.
I have a question, a very important question with regard to what we hear a lot. My colleagues, some of my colleagues and friends here in El Paso, Texas will say, this is God's country. We are a godly people. God founded this nation. One nation under God is put into our Pledge of Allegiance and things like this. How do you deal with that when people say we were founded by God? This is not just a secular state;
Right.
it is a Christian country.
Right.
How do you deal with that?
Well, you know, it's very easy to trace that back to the beginning of the country as the European settlers came over during the 17th century. John Winthrop's famous sermon as he was sailing the Atlantic to the Massachusetts Bay Colony was the City on the Hill sermon that he gave, and that the Americas was going to be the new city on the hill, ordained by God. And so that language has gotten into the DNA of the American culture. The problem with that is it's not always as accurate as some people believe it to be, because you look at colonialism and you look at the history of America, especially the founding of America, and you discover a very, very diverse and multi-layered faith system in colonialism. As I said in the breakfast this morning, one of my favorite theologians is Roger Williams. And when Roger Williams sailed the Atlantic and arrived in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, he was quickly ostracized and persecuted for his views on religious liberty and the freedom of conscience. And he was banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony by those who were in charge, because there was no separation of church and state. And so Williams goes and he founds Providence, Rhode Island, and tells other people of other traditions to come where they can truly worship God as their conscience dictated. And just a wonderful writer, wonderful theologian. And so that occurred throughout the 17th century. We see that time and time again, where Christians from other traditions, such as Quakers and Baptists and even Catholics, were persecuted by those who were the established church and ran the government at that time. And so that was the struggle for the first 100 years or so of this country. And then into the 18th century, and when the American revolutionary spirit began to emerge, the founding fathers were lobbied to an extent by Baptists of all people, such as Isaac Backus from Massachusetts and John Leland from Virginia, asking the founding fathers to include religious liberty into the Constitution. And so we're able to see the development of the First Amendment through those lines of conversation. And it is evident, if you look at the founding fathers' remarks, that this country was never meant to be founded as a Christian nation. And they say that even in their own writings, that the government, as they understood it, was to be neutral towards religion, so that religion could thrive in a free market. And so the neutrality of the government is vitally important for the churches, and that conscience should never be jeopardized, especially when we're talking about the state.
Our time is going very fast. I'd like to have you here for a few hours. We could really have a long discussion. Key question here is talk about your organization's relationships with Americans United organization and other organizations, either major denominational organizations, and how do you interact with some of these other groups? Muslim groups now are highly in question about what's going on in this country. What kind of things do you and your organization set up to have these interactions going on?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the Baptist Joint Committee is composed of several different denominations around the country. Not only are the Cooperative Baptists involved in the BJC, but so are Virginia Baptist and Texas Baptist are involved in the BJC, as well as Seventh-day Adventist, Progressive National Baptist, American Baptist USA. All of these organizations have a seat at the table, so we are coming together to work on religious liberty and church-state issues. Now, because of our spirit of ecumenicism and collaboration, it is a natural extension to look outside of the Baptist tradition to work with other faith groups on religious liberty matters. And now that with the rise of Islamic societies across the country, as well as our Jewish friends and Sikh friends, we are coming together to talk about the importance of religious liberty, because if there is one single point of theology that we should be able to agree on in this country, is that everybody should be able to worship their God as their conscience dictates, and there should be no infringement upon that religion or that individual from the state. And
well, does that make your group very suspicious by those outside that have very narrow views? They believe their group is the only one who's going to get to heaven, for example.
Right.
And some of them, you offer them to come and join, but they don't want to because they think you're too liberal or too inclusive.
Yes, we have conversations with them regarding these particular issues, and there are times where we disagree vehemently about certain issues. But we always maintain a spirit of dialogue, try to find areas in which we can work together. I remember during the last several elections, last couple of presidential elections, especially when Governor Romney was running for president on the Republican ticket, there were concerns about his Mormonism. And we had both liberal groups and conservative groups saying, hey, according to the United States Constitution, there is no religious test for public service. And so Governor Romney's faith really should not be a test for whether he would be a good president or not. And then, of course, more recently, President Obama and all the accusations, the false allegations that were leveled against him, people saying that he was a Muslim. I think Colin Powell rebutted those beautifully when he said, even though he is not a Muslim, he's a Christian, even if he was, it doesn't matter according to the Constitution, because we have no religious test in this country. And so we've been able to work with both conservative and liberals regarding religious liberty. Again, there are issues where we disagree on, but we would disagree respectfully and hopefully provide an example for the rest of the country to follow.
Well, I was attending Wayland Baptist College at the time that John Kennedy was running for president, First Catholic. And my political science professor, Dr. Eugene Jones, he went to the University of North Carolina. And it was strange for some of us to support John Kennedy for president since he was a Catholic.
Right.
And of course, Kennedy came to Texas and went to Houston and talked to the Baptists in Texas to convince them he was not a threat and he was not going to take orders from the Pope.
That's
you
right.
remember that argument?
I do remember that argument. I've seen videotape of that. And what Kennedy said still rings true today. Kennedy said, I believe in an absolute separation between church and state. And I do not believe in a Catholic America or a Protestant America or a Jewish America. I believe in a United States of America. That comment still rings true today. As a people of two kingdoms, those who are people of faith, we have our faith tradition, but we also have our citizenship in the United States. And we are citizens of those two kingdoms. But when it comes to the institution of church and state, they should remain separate.
Okay, is that the most important lesson for us today here in El Paso on this program? What do you think is the most important thing you want to leave in our memory bank as you finish up today?
I think probably the most important thing that I could leave with residents of El Paso is that the first 16 words of the First Amendment are still relevant today. The free exercise clause, as it is stated, suggests that every citizen has the freedom to worship God or not to worship God as their conscience dictates, and that Caesar is not Lord and Caesar should never interfere in the religion of those people who are faithful to their religion.
Repeat the story of Jesus and the coin you were talking about this morning.
Yeah, this morning I was talking about in the Gospel of Matthew, the 22nd chapter, both two Jewish sects, both the Pharisees and the Herodians, were trying to entrap Jesus with a question. And what better trap to set than taxes?
Right.
No one likes taxes.
Right.
And so they asked him, is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor? And if Jesus answered this question in a loose manner, it spelt doom for him and possible death. The Pharisees hated Roman taxation and Roman occupation and only really wanted Rome completely out of Israel. The Herodians, on the other hand, they hated Rome too, but they realized that they were the rulers during that period and wanted to utilize Rome and rule through the lineage of Herod. And so Jesus rebutted them by asking them for a coin, and so they produce a coin for him. And on that coin was the image of the emperor. But there was more on that coin. Above the bust of the emperor, it simply read, God and High Priest, which really comically reveals the hypocrisy of both of those groups. But then Jesus goes on to say this, therefore give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. And forever cementing the legacy that church and state should remain separate.
That's one of the best stories in the Bible.
I agree.
And it gets into the area of politics. And Jesus did not play politics in that sense. The Zealots wanted him to be with them and play politics.
That's right, yes.
He wanted that. Tell us about that. Some of the people, now the article I wrote for Americans United a little over a year ago, I made the point that sometimes evangelicals that get into politics
Right.
that are Christians become less than Christian. Have you seen that?
Right, absolutely. I want to use a quote by Dr. Sheridan again. I was in a meeting with him in Atlanta, Georgia one year. In fact, he was the keynote speaker at a Baptist Joint Committee meeting. And he began his speech by using the term American Christianity. And what has happened in America is sometimes, for some at least, the adjective has become more important than the noun. It's more important to be American than it is to be Christian for some of them. And so as they have leveled the wall of separation, they are now trying to impose their theology upon all of society. Now, there's some misnomers about religious liberty. One of them is that, and church-state separation, one of them is that church and state separation means that Christians should be silent on all these issues. That could never be further from the truth. Christians have the right to speak truth to power. The wall that Jefferson talked about is a wall that sets boundaries, but a wall that can be talked over. And communication can occur. Right. And so we have seen that through history. You mentioned your work on the slavery issue historically. You know, we know Christian abolitionists brought about in England and in America that to the forefront of legislators' minds. And then we saw it more recently in the civil rights movement in the South, when a Baptist minister by the name of Martin Luther King Jr. Took to his pulpit to call out the evils of Jim Crow during that period. And so they spoke truth to power. But at the same time, we recognize that we're not the only citizens in this country, that there are other voices. So these voices all come to the public square to have a conversation. And then hopefully we can somehow compromise and come up with the best way for us to move forward. But what we see more recently is that there is a growing tide of people who want to impose their narrow religious views upon all of society. And that is a breach of church-state separation.
I agree with you. You know, this has been the most fascinating conversations I've had in 10 years
well,
of this
I enjoy
program.
being here. Thank you so much.
I'm glad you came. I'm glad that we sat down beside each other last night, and I'm glad we were near each other this morning and looking once again with fresh eyes at this issue of church and state. Roger Williams would be proud of us today talking about this. Any thought about that?
Well, I hope Roger Williams would be proud of us. You know, the more that we're able to allow religion to be separated from the government, the more opportunity religion has to thrive in our society. And that is important, because the one thing that Roger Williams did establish for us is that when it is separated from government, it is able to do and work at its very best.
I agree. I agree. I'm glad that today I'm kind of acting like Forrest Gump, and we sat down close to each other and had this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for being with us. I'm Leon Blevins, and this is a special, special guest talking on the National Day of Prayer.